Welcome to an exploration of the self and the space we occupy. This is Chapter 9 of Bingism, the philosophy of unowned life. Today, we delve into the complex relationship between the crowd and the performer. Humans are born natural. Look at a child or an animal. They exist in the purity of their own being without the weight of perception. But somewhere along the way, we learn to perform. Not because we want to, but because we believe we must. We imagine eyes watching us, judging, measuring, comparing, and evaluating, and under the weight of those phantom gazes, we begin to shape ourselves for those eyes. This is what we call the audience illusion, the quiet, persistent force that pulls us away from our nature and into a crowded life of performance. The crowd is not always literal. Most of the time, the crowd lives entirely within our minds. And the performer is not always visible on a stage. Most of the time, the performer lives in our everyday behavior. This chapter reveals how the crowd distorts the self and how we can use the principles of Bingism to guide ourselves back to authenticity. Consider the birth of the performer. A performer is not born. He is created by attention. Think of how your posture changes when you walk into a crowded room, or how your voice shifts when you realize someone is listening to your conversation. When eyes appear, the performer emerges. He becomes louder, brighter, more dramatic. He exaggerates his movements and adjusts his stance. He modifies his vocabulary and his tone. In that moment, he becomes a reflection instead of a person. He stops being natural and starts being seen. We do this every single day. We perform at work to appear competent. We perform online to appear successful. We perform in relationships to be loved. We perform even in silence, imagining the reactions of people who aren't even there. This is the audience illusion. It is the belief that our worth is tied to the spectacle we provide. The crowd itself is not inherently harmful. It is simply powerful. Attention acts like a lens that distorts the subject. When we feel the weight of judgment, our identity begins to warp. Comparison begins to rot our sense of self-worth. Expectation begins to choke out authenticity. The crowd turns humans into mirrors, reflecting back what they think others want to perceive. This is how the mask is formed. At first, the performer is a role we play for a moment. But soon, the mask becomes a habit. The habit becomes a personality. And eventually, that personality becomes a prison, where the true self is forgotten, buried under layers of social strategy. We find ourselves living life as a series of set pieces, wondering why we feel so hollow when the applause dies down. At the center of this performance is the ego. Ego is not the villain of this story, but rather the costume the performer wears. Ego is a survival mechanism that demands to be noticed. It whispers, "I must be impressive. I must be admired. I must be chosen. I must be remembered. I must be better." Above all, ego whispers, "I must be seen." The ego is terrified of invisibility. It fears ordinariness and loathes silence. But we must remember that the ego is not the self. The ego is merely the actor on the stage. The true self is much quieter. The self is simpler. The self is natural. The self does not need the validation of a crowd, and it certainly does not need applause to justify its existence. To find the self, we must learn to take off the costume. Maintaining this performance is exhausting. Think of the energy it takes to manage your image every hour of every day. It drains your vitality. It distorts your decisions, leading you to choose paths that look good from the outside, but feel empty on the inside. It fuels the fire of anxiety and amplifies every tiny insecurity. When we live for the crowd, we buy things we don't need. We speak words we don't mean, and we dress in ways that feel like a disguise. We move, dream, and even suffer for the audience. The performer becomes trapped in a life that was never truly his. It is a life of strategy rather than a life of flow. But there is a way out. Bingism teaches that liberation does not come from loud rebellion, but from quiet living. Quiet living is not about isolation or hiding from the world. It is about authenticity. It is the practice of making choices without imagining an audience watching from the shadows. Imagine the freedom of living without performance, without comparison, and without the perpetual need for validation. This is the return to nature. This is the return to the self that exists without needing to be seen. When you live quietly, the ego begins to soften. The sharp edges of anxiety begin to dissolve. Comparison fades away because there is no one to compete with. Authenticity returns. Peace emerges. Clarity grows. Quiet living is not about turning away from the world. It is about no longer performing for it. It is the realization that you are not a product to be marketed or a brand to be managed. When the crowd in your mind disappears, the performer dissolves. You will notice it in the way you breathe. You will move with a different kind of grace, one that is not calculated. You will think more clearly and feel more deeply. You begin to remember yourself. You remember that you are not a spectacle. You are not a reflection of other people's expectations. You are a human being, a part of the natural world, moving with life rather than trying to command it. You are a component of the universe, not a performer on its stage. You are finally yourself. Let us close with the performer's creed. Internalize these words. I release the imagined eyes. I release the silent judges. I release the phantom expectations. I release the need for applause. I release the performance. I return to quiet. I return to nature. I return to myself. I live without audience. I live without distortion. I live without illusion.